Story time. A little bit of story time. So, graffiti's a thing that was pretty significant in my life and kind of sparked my interest in art, which is just like a huge, massive part of me in my life. So, I thought I would start off and we'll do a little chronological series or something of stories where I talk about graffiti. And this is like the pre-introduction to my relationship with graffiti, I guess. So this is before I even knew what graffiti was. This is what we're talking about, but I was doing it. So in high school, so for context, high school for me was grades 7 to 12, and it was in Outlook, Saskatchewan. Town of 2,500 people, 1 hour away from Saskatoon. I moved there for grade 6. So I was in Lethbridge from K to 5, grade 6, moved to Outlook, and then I was in elementary school for 1 year, and then it was high school from grade 7 to 12. So shortly after high school, I remember, or like shortly after getting into high school, so around grade 7, I remember just like, I had these like real cheap binders, and I remember when I would use like black marker on them, they would like turn like this weird like shiny green and stuff, or if it was like black marker on the red like binder, I don't know, there's just weird little things like that I remember, and it was all because I just enjoyed writing on this surface, these smooth chisel tip markers, and I would like write like the subject on the front of the binder, but then I would always like write quotes and like all this other stuff on there, but it was always like real wonky writing. And if I show you like even the burned CDs at the time, like CDs that got burned for me, but I like did the writing on them. Actually, I have this old CD wallet here that has some of those, so maybe I'll dip into that and show you some of that writing. It was really bad, really bad, but it was this stylized writing. So I guess we need to also define graffiti, because for me, what defines graffiti is stylized letter structure. Basically, that you're creating letters, words made of letters, with intended style. You are trying to stylize it. Graffiti is not just writing by itself. Anything could be graffiti. No, that's not what I believe. It also it's not synonymous with vandalism. This is probably yeah, I'll go off into a tangent some other time about graffiti. Oh, here's one. Let me not do that. Oh, here we go. Audio Blood. Audio Blood 1 and 2. That was some of my writing from like that was probably like grade 10. The writing I did before that was even worse. But I don't have any burned CDs in here from an earlier era, unfortunately, or fortunately. So, woo, tumbleweed. Okay, so, so I was, like I said, I was doing graffiti before I knew what graffiti was. I didn't know that term, like that. I think maybe at some point I had the same definition of it that a lot of people incorrectly have, is like, oh, it's just like vandalizing like bathrooms and stuff, or just like spray painting like F you on a wall, like that's graffiti, which is, it's not. Anyway, so I was just like, with CD stuff or like on my binders or whatever, like I was always just writing in this crazy way just to make like art out of it, just like to make it funky, I don't know. And then there was this is where things start to get like I don't know how to explain it. This is where like the relationship of vandalism and graffiti for me was really early on, but I still didn't even know what graffiti was. So there was this kid who was a friend of mine from church, and he was in Saskatoon. He came over to stay with me for a weekend in Outlook, or maybe it's just one night, but I think it was a weekend just to like hang out. And I don't remember what, I think this would have been maybe grade 8 for me, I think. And I remember, like, I don't know, he was just like always like the super like cool, like didn't care about anything, that kind of cool like guy. But I remember that when he was staying with me, like town was like super boring, right? There was nothing to do. So like he came and stayed with me, and it was not his jam, which I completely understand. And he suggested we go out tagging stuff, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, what's tagging? Which is kind of funny in retrospect, just because later on, after I had like entered that community in Saskatoon, I kind of realized, looking back on this experience with this guy, that I'm like, I don't really think he was into tagging really, like habitually into that community. It was just something that, I don't know, seemed like somehow he got introduced to the concept and knew people that did it probably, and then something that he just did when he was there because it was super boring. I don't know. So he wrote the name Regular Pimp, and I didn't know what to write, and was super paranoid and scared and whatever else. And we like went down to a park, and like I wrote Jiskip, Jiskip. And it probably looked absolutely atrocious and horrible. I can think of it being very straight lines and angular and stuff. But man, it's windy. It is windy. So, and then we also, I remember we went to the school, but I was too paranoid to write on it myself, and I know he did. And then he like went away, and then because of all this writing I was doing on my binders, it seemed very like obvious that it would be me, and probably because I was also new. I don't think it was a racial thing, because also in that town there was like 3 families, including like me, who were not white. So like I don't think it was that, but just like there was no evidence that it was me or this other guy at all. But it was just like, oh, John writes weird on his binders, so it's probably him. And I was like this scared little idiot who just like basically admitted it once they talked to me about it. I didn't know what graffiti was then either. I still didn't. I like went and participated in what most people would think of as graffiti, is like vandalizing property with spray paint, writing words, and I still don't even know really what graffiti was. Like, I just didn't. Anyway, I had to do 20 hours of community service in the art room, and that was funny just because of like community service in the art room and like the Association of Art and Graffiti and stuff. So that was like a conditional sentence. Basically, I did my community service and I didn't get a criminal record, or like I didn't get charged with anything, or didn't stay on a record or anything like that really. So that was kind of like these 2 things that tie together with just like, yeah, I was writing on my own stuff all the time, didn't really know what I was doing, just really liked playing with letters and style and stuff. And then how like I was doing that already, and then my introduction via one person from like the big city who was like super cool, and then introduced me to the vandalism aspect of graffiti and tagging. And then it was years before like I went to Saskatoon, and then was reintroduced to the topic of tagging and stuff. And then it was like, oh, this is that thing. Like, oh snap, like I didn't make the connection like before I moved to Saskatoon, because I had never really been introduced to that concept again in between, like it was like 4 years maybe. I never met anybody or anything, just like it just never came up again. It was crazy. In retrospect, just like weird to not know what graffiti is in that period of time. Like, it was really sheltered living in that small town, and no one did it there. Like, people, like, there was always like on the bridge and stuff, people would like write grad 20 like whatever, or grad 1999, or grad 2005. Like, that was always on the bridge, and there really wasn't much else. And I never would have interpreted that as graffiti anyway. I mean, I don't now, and then I guess, I mean, then that would have been what old people and people who don't understand what graffiti is would say graffiti is. But like I said, at the time, I had no idea. Like, whatever, just didn't connect the dots. And I don't know, it's just interesting. It was never something that was talked about in the art classes that I took. From grade 7 to 12, I took art just because I couldn't take band, basically. Or not that I couldn't. I didn't take band. We only had, we had very few option courses to take in that school because it's such a small school. Art was the class that I ended up taking, and like I said, it was never approached in that class that I recall at all. Not even lettering or typography or graffiti or stylizing letters or public art or anything like that. Just wasn't discussed. Art class was super boring. Anyway, and that'll be part of another discussion. But like, yeah, I don't know. That's the short story of like the pre-introduction to my introduction to graffiti. I think, yeah, like I said, that's a really short story about my pre-introduction to graffiti. A little bit of kind of how I define graffiti, but I don't want to get into the details of that right now. Just kind of, for some reason or whatever, I was just drawn to drawing letters from an early age more than I was drawn to doing like figures and monsters and stuff. And I remember drawing some of those when I was like smaller, when I was in Lethbridge actually. I remember doing some like monster stuff. But yeah, I didn't really, I wasn't that kid just like doodling all the time and stuff. That's not who I was. Like, I don't know. And then in high school, I wrote a lot. I was just writing and writing and writing and writing. And then eventually, like I said, I just liked to play with the letters I was writing, just the words. Like the title, whenever I titled like a poem or something, I would make that like extra frilly and like stylized. And then eventually that translated into my regular writing. And yeah, that's it. With that, I mean, that's a short story. The other one definitely is longer and way more interesting. But this is the pre-introduction to my introduction to graffiti. Next one, I want to have a little story time about my introduction to graffiti, the real one, because that's way more interesting. But this is the setup, so we'll see you on another time.